Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Backlog Bunker. I regret to inform you that I don't have any specific games to talk about this week because, well, I didn't really play much of anything aside from Dead Cells and Marvel Rivals. But I do have a lot of topics to talk about this week, mostly just things that came to my mind, but one from a video that I had seen, Oh, and one from a comment that I got, because that was also supposed to be an aspect of the show that doesn't really get brought up much because I don't have a huge audience, but one day. To address a viewer comment first, Pizza Steak asked if multiplayer games are as good without a large community, which is kind of topical due to the fact that a new Fatal Fury game is coming out, and it being a fighting game, as well as being a fighting game that is not one of the big three, means that it's going to face an uphill battle in terms of actually having a large community, especially one that sticks around for a long time. And as far as my perspective, the short answer is no, they're not really as good without a large community, because, you know, the entire point of these games is competition. A fighting game is just not good without someone to play it against, and especially someone to play it against that you can improve against, because no fighting game has ever had, good single-player content. The best they've ever gotten is passable, is okay single-player content. There's never been a fighting game that's ever been released where it's like, yes, this content, the single-player content, makes up the game. You can just play this and be fine. At least no real fighting game. Obviously, things like 3D anime fighters are different, and even then, I don't know if I could come up with an argument for any one of them being good. But as far as real fighting games with real mechanics go, I don't think any of them has ever had good single-player content. But then, even when playing against other people, if you're a newcomer coming to a game that's thousands of years old, because that's how long fighting games have been around for, you're probably not going to have much fun with that either, because you either have to dedicate time to people sitting you down and teaching you how to play, which is just not fun, at least not for me. I've never enjoyed sitting down and having someone walk me through playing a fighting game. Though I guess even in non-video game settings, I don't particularly like having to be sat down and taught how to do something, so whatever, that might just be a me thing. But to get back to the point, I've always thought that with fighting games it's way more engaging to just play the game against someone of your skill level, and then naturally you're going to want to get better than them so that you can beat them, which will naturally lead you to playing the game better, and so on and so forth, until you're one of the better players of the game. Which will not happen unless you have people of your skill level that you can regularly play against. That isn't just the same person, because then you start to develop habits that only work against that person. But, to elongate the short answer that I gave earlier, the community doesn't actually have to be large to accomplish this. I just think it needs to be active, because even if there are only 100 players of a single fighting game, right? If 20 of those players are in the lower level, and then 20 of them are on a mid-tier level, and then so on and so forth. I think I got my numbers wrong because it was supposed to be bigger, then the pool gets smaller as the players get better. Point being, as long as there are people at every skill level for you to fight against, there is just no end to the amount of content you can get out of a game. So the community doesn't have to be large, but you have to be able to find these people. And you have to be able to find them online too, because not everyone has time to go to a local every week, especially if it's an hour drive away, if even. And that's just for games with competition in them. In games that are just multiplayer that you aren't trying to compete in, it gets even easier. Mario Party is not a competitive game, but you can just find servers where people play Mario Party, and then play Mario Party. Of course, nowadays it's a little bit different because the newer Mario Parties have online play, but the newer Mario Parties also suck dick. So if you want to play the older Mario Parties that are actually good, of which I mean 6 because that's the only good one, then you can just go and find servers where people are playing them, and you'll be able to find no short amount of people, even if the total number of people playing Mario Party 6 in the entire world is not very large. Though, to completely go against my answer, this does change a bit for some genres. If League of Legends, for some ungodly reason, managed to lose all of its player base, and no one played the game except for a handful of people, it would become an extremely uninteresting game very, very quickly. Not that I would know, because I don't play League of Legends, I kinda hate MOBAs. Well, no, not kinda, I just hate MOBAs. They're way too slow. Point being, but the entire thing with those games, and this goes for hero shooters as well, any game that requires a large number of people to play with, it exponentially makes it harder to actually play that game and enjoy it. Because, again, a Mario Party, that's only 4 people. A fighting game, that's only 2 people. But a MOBA, 10 people. A hero shooter, sometimes it's 12 people. And having to find 11 distinct individuals to play the game against consistently to improve your skills, or to even keep the game interesting, is not gonna work for very long. Again, with the fighting game example, as long as there's one other person that you want to be better than, you're going to inevitably improve at the game. But with a hero shooter, if there's 11 distinct people in the game, some of which are your teammates, and some of which are your enemies, and they may not always be your teammates or your enemies, how do you track your own improvement? It's a big, complicated web, and generally you want your multiplayer games to have big and active communities, but if you had to choose one, I'd say active rather than not. But at the same time, the more players your game requires, the more large is going to just have to be a factor you have to put in. And thanks for the question, Piece of Steak. If anyone else has any questions, then feel free to ask them, or comments about the things that I do talk about, because the engagement is what I wanted to get out of this series, less so than just a diary of every game that I played in a week. That's mostly just a catalyst for the conversation, but whatever works for now. I'm just gonna keep it going and see how it goes. For the topic that I came up with from watching another video, this comes from Ed Venture's Could There Ever Be a Fourth Core Character Class video, which is from like 10 months ago, but in a rare bout of YouTube's recommendation system actually working, it came up and I recommended, and I thought it was pretty interesting. I think he spends a little bit too long talking about not the topic of the video, but once he gets to the actual point, he brings up a pretty good idea for what the fourth core character class could be, and that's around info. I won't recap it here, go watch his video, because again, it does get interesting eventually. I just wanted to spring off of that to bring up my own idea for what I think the fourth core character class could be. Something that Adventure brings up is that the 3 core character classes that already exist all revolve around the health economy. Damages take the other guy's health down, tanks prevent your health from going down, and supports or healers bring your health back up. And the reason this is the case is because in the vast majority of games with these core character classes, the objective of the game is to kill the other guy and to not get killed. So, what if you split the classes into offensive and defensive? Defensive would obviously be tanks and healers, they prevent you from getting killed, and they bring your health back up to prolong you not getting killed. But offensively, there's only the damage class, which is to bring the other guy's health down. And so, if damage is the opposite of healing, you bring their health down, they bring their health back up, then what would be the opposite of tanking? Arguably tanking has no opposite because the entire point is that it's supposed to stagnate and be neutral. But if you abstract it a little bit, think about it like this. Tanks prevent your health from moving positively. You don't want your health to go down, so you stop it from moving. So the opposite of that would be to stop the other person's health from moving, but positively. You don't want their health to be going back up. So my idea for what the fourth core character class would be is a class that's just about disruption, that prevents the other team from protecting themselves, that makes them vulnerable. I'm thinking of abilities that stop the other person from healing, or stop them from using their abilities, or maybe movement-based things that like splits the enemy team up so they aren't as close to each other. I'm thinking of like a hacker-type character that has some sort of network hack where if they use it on one person, it disables their abilities, but if they're close to their other teammates, then it also spreads to them, and so you make use of the fact that they are trying to protect themselves by making them vulnerable. That would be the whole idea of the class. Which, in saying that makes me think that might just be a thing that Sombra does, but I don't play Sombra in Overwatch 2, and I never looked into Sombra in Overwatch 2, so that might already be what she is, which kind of brings me to the point that a lot of people bring up in the comments of Adventure's video, which is that a lot of the idea of this fourth character class, whether it be disruption or information, a lot of these already belong to support. That being because support is a very general term that could apply to very many things. Basically anything that isn't already DPS or tank would belong in support, as long as it's supporting your team. But again, as many of the people in Adventure's comments will point out, it's probably just best that the support class be split into healing and then whatever the fourth class would be, because basically anything you could come up with for the fourth class would already fit into support. So if you wanted to specify healing and then support, that support would be whatever your fourth class is, depending on the context of your game, which then brings up games where the objective isn't to kill the other guy, because like I've said, the only reason the 3 core character classes exist in the way that they do is because in most of these games, the objective is to kill the other guy and to not get killed. But what about in games where that isn't the case? Splatoon, being the fantastic series that it is, brings us up in a very interesting way, because in no game mode in Splatoon is the objective to kill the other person. You can get through any game of Splatoon without ever having to kill another person and still win the game. If you want to be pedantic about it, technically you would have to kill someone if you were losing tower control or Rainmaker, but assuming you were already in control of the Rainmaker, or in control of the tower, then you wouldn't have to kill anyone because you would survive to the end. So what about Splatoon? Does Splatoon have core character classes? Kinda. Normal guns are good for both painting turf and getting kills, rollers are good for painting turf, paintbrushes are, ironically, not very good for painting turf, snipers are really only good for killing. There are different weapons, and the weapons are good at different things, but there aren't necessarily character classes, which gets more complicated the more the games go on and they add more weapons, because you have things like dual shots that are seemingly really only made for getting kills, because what else would they use the fucking dodge roll for? Or the katanas added in 3, which seem to just be made for the purpose of being better paintbrushes. The point being, when it really comes down to it, I think Splatoon's character classes are really only a binary. There is getting kills and there is inking turf, and every weapon exists on that spectrum. Snipers, getting kills. Rollers, painting turf. Paintbrushes, despite having paint in the name, are actually for getting kills. And so on and so forth. And for our last topic, I want to ask how much we think that games need to tutorialize themselves, because this question came up to me in 2 ways over the last 2 weeks that I've been not doing this. The first being through Dead Cells, because as of recently, I've gotten my 3rd stem cell, which in 20 hours of playing the game on PC was something that I was never able to do playing the game for probably double the time on both Switch and Game Pass. Part of the reason for this is probably because I know how to play the game better now, and I'm not just talking about getting better at like dodging or parrying or anything like that. No, I mean like the actual mechanics of the game were things that I did not understand previously. I'm talking primarily about the scroll system, where the way Dead Cells works is that you want to go for a certain build for your run, whether that be brutality, tactics, or survivability, which are kind of inaccurate because the way they're generally grouped together is brutality is offensive, tactics are sort of like passive, and then survivability is, well, it's kind of in the name, but there are survivability weapons that are very offensive, and tactics weapons that are very offensive, just ranged. But the point is, you only want to go with one of them. If you get a green weapon, and you want it to be really strong, you're only going to want to pick up green scrolls, assuming that's an option. If you only have a red or purple scroll, then you're just going to have to pick up one or the other. But why exactly do you want to pick up only one kind of scroll? Well, that's because, as I understand it now, every time you grab a scroll, it'll improve the aspects of that scroll type. So for example, if you have the mutation Necromancy, then you'll heal every time you kill an enemy. But if you keep getting green scrolls, the amount that you heal will keep increasing. Or if you have a green weapon, then the amount of damage that weapon does will just keep getting multiplied by a percentage every time you pick up a green scroll. So if you only stick to one scroll type, your weapons could be doing 10 times as much damage, your mutations could be 10 times as effective, and that's just not going to work if you spread yourself thin and get multiple of every scroll type whenever you have the option. Which was not something that I understood when I played the game for the first 2 times. Because when you pick up a scroll, the first thing my eye is drawn to, not only because it's in the center of the screen, but also because it's the biggest font, is the text saying that your health will increase. And while the health bonus starts out pretty big, unlike the damage and mutation bonuses, the health bonuses actually decrease every time. So when you start out with something like 70, it might go down to like 5% by the time you pick up your like 15th scroll. And to me, someone who had only been reading the center text the entire time I've been playing the game, I just kept seeing that the more of one scroll type I picked up, the less my health went up, so I just kept grabbing the scroll that gave me the biggest number. And while now I absolutely understand that's my fault for not having read it, because on the screen when you pick up the scroll, it does show you your mutation and the damage number that goes up, but I just never even bothered looking at the damage number, and for the mutations, I didn't think the numbers were actually changing, I just saw that they listed the mutations there, and I thought it was just like, oh yeah, by the way, fun fact, these are the mutations you still have. I'd never read them closely enough to realize that the actual number was changing. And while I realize now that that's absolutely my fault, it did make me realize that Dead Cells never actually had a tutorial. At least not a real tutorial. They just kind of throw you into the game and tell you the controls. Which is fine, because for the scrolls, you just have to fucking read them, and then for everything else, you can just play the game normally. Obviously, the minutia might get lost on you a little bit, but if you're into the minutia of a roguelike, you're probably going to end up having to look that shit up anyway, which is a completely different conversation about game design that I think is kind of bad, but whatever. The point is, it can work if you just play the game by itself. But it makes me wonder, what games do need tutorials? How much should be in those tutorials? When should these tutorials be given? And while Dead Cells might be an example of a game that doesn't need a tutorial to get its point across, something that I think exists in the complete opposite of that spectrum is Fire Emblem Awakening. Because earlier when I said that the only things I had played this week were Dead Cells and Marvel Rivals, I lied, because I was away for a while, and while I was away I only brought my 3DS with me, and so I played a lot of Fire Emblem Awakening, as I am wont to do. And the more I try to maximize my time out of Fire Emblem Awakening, the more I find out about the game that I just never knew about before. Like, for example, I didn't know the game had stat caps. For every class in the game, there is a maximum their stats can be before they just won't go up anymore no matter what. The maximum is being identified by whenever one of the stats in your character turns green. Except for health, which is a flat 80 for every character in the game. But the game never tells you this, or even really shows you this. The only reason I know that the stat caps are green is because the stats turn green. I said, wow, that's weird, I wonder what that's about, and I looked it up and I found out, oh, that's a stat cap. God forbid I hadn't gotten curious and just wasted a lot of my time trying to grind up characters that could not have been improved anymore. And this applies to very, very many aspects of the game, chief among them being breeding. Because Fire Emblem Awakening Eugenics is not really all that complicated, but none of it's really explained to you either. For example, the skills that the child gets from their parents is determined by whatever's in the last skill slot for that parent. So if you want the child to have that specific skill, you have to reorder your skills to make sure that the one you want to give is in the last slot, which is something you just don't know because the game doesn't tell you. And then in terms of stats, the base stat that the child has is determined by whatever the base stats of their parents are whenever you start the paralog. So it's entirely possible that whenever you meet one of the children characters, they'll already have their max stats for whatever class that they're in at the time, because their parents' base stats are so high that even with the calculation that, splits them up among them, it'll still end up with a child with base stats that are way too high for their own class. class. Until, of course, you use a Master Seal on them, but that's obviously further. Same goes for stat growth. It's also dependent on the stat growth of their parents, which depends on what class they are at the time, which means you could have a child that grows exponentially fast, so much so that even after Master Sealing, they might just have the max stats for their class after like 20 levels, which is something that none of the parents can say about their own class. Having only second sealed once, Owain and Inigo are both already at their max stats in my party, and Morgan's a fucking Hulk baby, because I paired up female Robin with Donald, which means that Morgan started out as a villager with insanely high stats, and then they only grew faster and faster. I say all this to say, eugenics are the best part about Fire Emblem Awakening, and the game doesn't tell you anything about them. And so, to bring us back to the original question, why not? Why aren't these things tutorialized? And I think the answer in Fire Emblem Awakening's case is because they wanted it to feel more natural than having to grind out all the efficiency in the game. Because if you don't know anything about how eugenics works in Fire Emblem Awakening, and you just meet one of the kid characters and they have the skills of their parents, you'll just go, oh, that's cute, they have the skills of their parents, while not realizing exactly why they took what skills they did. If Donald has a kid, you might generally get the idea that Donald's skill would be really strong, but you don't know exactly why, because obviously you don't know the calculations. So the ultimate goal of the system is to be immersive, while not exactly revealing his hand, but still being consistent enough to be able to make use of if you are aware of it. Which, in a realistic sense, I understand, because in terms of the game design, you want people on their first playthrough to just be immersed in it, to let it happen, and, you know, let things play out the way that they do. But then on further playthroughs, when they actually look into how the game works, then they can start building the efficiency into it and get better and better at the game the more and more they play it. But, as someone who deeply loves Fire Emblem Awakening, it does bother me a little bit that there are people out there who just don't know the full complexity of the game and how fun it can be, because the game never told them about it, and they never tell them about it afterwards, because in subsequent playthroughs, they don't tell you anything more. I had to look up all this information, and I've been playing the game for 400 hours at this point, and I still didn't know some things. So again, I ask, how much do games need to tutorialize themselves? Do they do it so much that it takes away the immersive experience of the game while still making the general experience of the game better in the long run? Do they break down the mechanics that you know how to play, but then just let you off on your own? Or do they just put it out in plain text and let you figure it out for yourself? It's a complex question, and in many such cases when it comes to video games, the answer is it depends. But I hope at least talking about the two games that I did gives more perspective on what the question might actually be for other specific games, which is my secret way of telling you people to tell me what your thoughts are, and also that I might come back to this topic again in the future. Hopefully I have more specific things to talk about next week, but for now, thank you for watching the Backlog Bunker, and I'll talk to you all next time.